Evolution gave horses some incredible gifts. To spot predators at a distance, horses developed huge eyes with amazing acuity. In daylight, horses see almost as well as humans. But at night, they see better. They have almost 360-degree vision. They have only 2 blind spots, just behind and directly in front. But even here, horses have a kind of second sight. Like a human hand, their lips are loaded with nerve endings. Their whiskers are so sensitive, they can detect what their eyes can't see. Blades of grass are like sandpaper on teeth. So horses' heads became longer to make room for rows of molars that never stop growing. As horses grew, their legs became longer and thinner. The legs of a runner. But the most amazing change of all was in their toes. They lost them all, except one. Standing on a single toe, the horse sits far out on the end of its evolutionary branch. An animal built to run, specialized for speed. Millions of years after it evolved, that extraordinary ability has us bewitched.
Okay, let's get to how do you decide who does what? EQUUS had 3 different editors. You had multiple composers for Memento Mori and Vital Bonds. So how do you decide to divvy it up? How do you put together those teams?
Okay, there's 2 problems there. One is a problem of scale. I mean, how many people do you need to execute a project? The other is a problem of versioning. So let me talk about the latter first. With the transplant documentary, we got financing from the National Film Board of Canada and the Nature of Things, which have historically been enemies. For years, they have refused to work with each other because you have the NFB on one side saying, well, you know, it's the auteur process, it's in the hands of the director, and we can't sully this film with concerns of commercial television filmmaking. And on the other hand, the Nature of Things saying the NFB is impossible to work with. They don't understand that we have to have something that works for our audience on television, right? And it's never worked. So I thought this is a solvable problem if we have 2 parallel post-production teams. There's nothing wrong with the idea itself, the verite film about being caught in this world of transplant medicine against your will, or the new science of organ transplants. We just essentially have to make 2 different films with the same footage. So we had 1 production team, 1 cinematography and sound team. And at the point that we started post-production, we had an editor over here and an editor over here in different parts of the city, and they didn't talk. The process was parallel and not complementary. And we had different composers as well. And that's how we ended up with 2 projects that satisfied the National Film Board and the Nature of Things. And that was the logic of that.
Oh, that's interesting.
With EQUUS, we just had so much, right? We had 120 terabytes of footage translated into, just countless hours of material. And Brenda Turning, who had edited all 3 episodes of The Great Human Odyssey very well, said never again. Right? so we approached Scott Parker and Crystal Moss, and so 3 editors made that project. And we had other editors working on the behind the scenes and the mini docs and the short documentaries we made. So it was just managing workload in that case. And then the challenge becomes making sure the editors are talking to each other, because the episodes have to work as a whole. as three films that feel like the same project. So, you know, we've been in a house in Ritchie for a year, and everyone's got their room, and we have coffee together, and we talk. And actually what has happened is, you know, one editor will start with a sequence, and another editor will take it over. It's great. It's really, really worked out well. And one of the great side benefits of it has been that senior editors like Scott Parker and Brenda Turning have mentored more junior editors like Crystal Moss and Hans Olsen and Janet Saville.
And you also get multiple eyes on
Absolutely.
different segments.
Yeah,
Which is great.
So it's been a really wonderful experience, and it's great to have the scale with the project to bring a team together, because, you know, editors, let's face it, editors kind of live in their own little worlds,
Yes,
like
totally.
earthworms, right? So they don't talk to other people typically.
No,
So-
Walter Murch describes it as basically the same components of indoctrination. You sit in a dark little room by yourself and watch the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, that's a good description.
Okay, cool. Okay, so now that takes us to what we were talking about. Well, we sort of did talk about it a bit, but the idea of taking your premieres and screenings back to some of the communities that participated,
Yeah.
and making sure, essentially, how do you decide where premieres happen? What kind of when do the international releases happen? How does it all get coordinated?
Well, I'm not in the driving seat there. So the broadcasters we have relationships with will decide when to go to air. The anchor broadcaster gets the world premiere. So CBC has already gone with their three-part world premiere of EQUUS. And now PBS is coming with their versions in January and February. And the French and the Germans and the rest of the world will come afterwards. So that's all really out of my hands and decided by those broadcasters, you know, when it suits them. Of course, so as the producer, you're always racing to finish, right? I don't know why it's always the same, but it's always the same. Your post-production window is always compressed. In our case, CBC chopped 2 months off our post-production schedule because they decided they wanted EQUUS to lead their season. So this happened about 7 months before going to air, and suddenly we'd gone from, you know, quite a civilized post-production schedule. It was all worked out on my whiteboard to a crunch. And that's, you're kind of held hostage by the broadcaster. And that is the world of broadcast film, as opposed to making a doc for the National Film Board or for yourself, where it's finished when it's finished. I mean, that is the ideal for a filmmaker, right? But it's very seldom the case. You know, I envy other artists who get to work that way, because I mean, I know it's difficult not to have a deadline, but at the same time, we've always got a deadline, and we've also always got an exact duration. So we're always cutting these documentaries to the frame, and that also comes with, I think, creative compromises.
Yeah.
So you know, that's part of those deliverable constraints you work within when you go after this money.
Yeah, okay. We are set to take another little break. Do you guys have any questions about, okay, yeah, Ken?
If you are shooting 100 and whatever terabytes of footage, and then you've got a 90-minute product that you're trying to create or whatever, do you end up having a second market value for the unused footage to other documentarians or nature shows, etc.?
Yes. It's not something I used to think about, but with these insane shooting ratios, you end up with a lot of great footage that never gets used. So we are just starting a relationship with a stock footage house called Nature Footage down in Monterey, and we are preparing our unused footage for them to license. And I mean, that's a really interesting point that comes back to that question you had about how you survive between films. I think as a producer, you should think about monetizing your unused footage if you can, because we think in the future there'll be a little bit of money dribbling in as a result of that. And you know, I've got 2 cinematographers, sometimes 3 cinematographers working with me out there, and I just can't control them. You know, especially Aaron. Aaron's the worst. So these people wake up an hour before the sun comes up and just turn their cameras on. And very often, my job consists of, okay, I think we filmed enough here. I think that's fine. We've got that. Let's move on. So you end up with this huge amount of footage. The problem you get is how do you even open it up, look at it, consider it, choose it, process it. So we do have someone who's helping us with that right now, a junior editor, someone who's just starting out. And she's great, but she's spending half a year going through our footage for past films, putting this together. So yes, you can do it, but it certainly is a lot of work, I would say. And also, the minimum standard, of course, is HD, but really what the stock footage houses want now is 4K. Yeah.
Any other questions before we jump to a break? Yep.
Just what was your ratio of footage to what you ended up with?
Well, we don't know anymore. We used to know because we knew the hours of footage we'd shot. Now we have data, and a lot of it is off frame rates, so we don't have an answer to that question anymore. It's just a lot. I just see it in the faces of my editors month after month. It took 7 months to edit the first episode of the series. Gives you a sense of how much time it took just to get a handle on that footage before coming up with assemblies and cuts. Yeah. Stephen, you had a question?
Yes, I'm curious about story, and as a person that walks around and thinks, oh, I could make a film about that or that,
Yeah.
At what point do you know that, yes, this story is something that that I can tell, that I can get enough support behind to make a documentary about? Is it the criteria? Is it a feeling? Is it something else? And then to add on a little bit, the story that you pitched to CBC, how did that differ from the story that we saw in the documentary?
Okay, well, your first question, how do you know when you have a story that could be a film? I think you just develop that ability with time, and part of developing that ability, I think, is thinking you've got a story and then realizing you don't. Filmmakers will know that non-filmmakers think everything can be a story, right? But most subjects are not amenable to the visual language of film, right? I mean, there has to be something visual. There has to be footage. If you're telling a story about the past, and you've struggled with this, what's on the screen, right? That's a real challenge. Is there archival footage? Are we going to support this with interviews? If we're supporting this with interviews, what are we going to go to? So is there visual material? But then, is there an appetite for this story right now? I made a film about running, and it got greenlit like that because all of a sudden everyone was into barefoot running. So it was very timely. So you have to understand where the winds are blowing. It's really important to know what other films have been made. It's really important to know that you're not putting your energy into developing an idea that just got made by someone else. Do that work, because it's just a heartbreaker to, have spent months developing an idea. You get to the festival, you get into the speed dating chair, and you start your pitch, and the commissioning editor says, oh yeah, no, we've done that already. And that happens all the time, all the time. And then, is there a narrative? Is there a character? These are other elements. So there's so much that goes into making that assessment, I think, and it takes time and trial and error. The story that we have on the screen is quite different to the final treatments. There were main sequences like, for example, an endurance horse race in Patagonia that was in the final treatment that everyone signed up to, which became impractical. We couldn't schedule it, and we didn't think it was strong enough a story considering the money we'd have to spend. There were lots of those, so maybe 75% of the promised stories were actually in the final film. And no one ever felt betrayed. No one ever felt surprised. That's taken as a given that once once you start making the film, because it's a documentary, it's an exploratory process, and you will follow the strong stories. So that's what commissioning editors understand will happen, I think.
And so as you journey away from the story that you pitched, is there any kind of conversation that you need to have?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
is it pitch again as you decide that you want to move in a different direction? Do you have to get approval for that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it can be scary to think, oh, now I've got to phone up my commissioning editor and say, yeah, that character we told you about turns out not to want to work with us, or something like that, right? It's really scary, and it can lead you to not picking up the phone. But what's important to understand is once they have greenlit you, they've made a commitment, they put it in their fiscal year, they need that film to happen, right? So they're very unlikely to turn on you. So if you have a good reason for explaining a story divergence, new direction, it's likely going to go just fine. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you're pitching these projects originally to broadcasters, how much are you investing in the exhaustive research and putting together huge series bibles or whatever?
Yeah.
Before you just sort of get that soft pitch, yeah, that's cool. You do that first and then go back and say and sink a bunch of resources in, or do you just roll the dice?
No, you need to have that initial pitch that gives you a signal that there's something, there's some interest there. I believe that. So it's a fine line, but when you're talking about writing Bibles or final scripts, I mean that really is that would be what I would consider pre-production. That's not even development anymore, and that does cost a lot of money. So I wouldn't want to be doing that kind of work before you've got a letter of commitment. With EQUUS, we got a development investment from CBC, and when CBC makes a development investment, then you also get CMF development money. And I think we had a budget of about $55,000 for development alone. I mean, you can make a film with that kind of money, right? So we went out and shot our demo reel and had very flashy printed materials for all of our subsequent pitches. And I kind of regret taking that money now because we had to take it out of our production budget, right? And what making the demo reel showed me is that it's really expensive and not really worth it to shoot dramatic recreations of early horse cultures in Alberta. So I guess that was a valuable lesson, but we spent a lot of money to learn that. So I'm not that excited about taking development money unless you know that it's essential to getting the project to the stage where you can.
You don't feel that's like a broadcaster buying into greenlighting you?
Well,
By like investing in your development.
yeah, there is that. So once they've invested in development, it's harder for them to walk away from the project. But they will walk away from a portion of their developed projects every year. It's a case by case basis. I mean, if you're going to play that game, if you're going to say, I want development money from that broadcaster so that it's harder for them to walk away from this project, just be ready to lose that money in the production phase of the you have to give the money back to the CMF and to the broadcaster. It comes right into your production budget, right? And that's really difficult.
So for something like this, when you're looking for that first little bit of like, okay, this is something they might be into, I'm going to invest my own stuff into this. What does that look like? Are you going to like sort of speed dating scenario with like a stack of one sheets, or are you kind of know exactly what, or is it in the dark, or how does that work?
Well, I think the best way to answer that question is to say that we got to EQUUS incrementally over 12 years of producing successful documentaries, mostly with CBC. So every single one of those projects was viewed as a success by CBC. Many of them won big awards, as in not Ampias. And so with every success, we were able to have a friendly set of debriefing meetings with the broadcaster. It's in those debriefing meetings or at the table at the Canadian Screen Awards when you bring up your new ideas, right? So that's why it doesn't just happen overnight. It happens incrementally. One of my favorite times to pitch my next story is when I'm in Toronto for broadcast week of my current documentary, because you're there for a week, you're doing all the media interviews, and and you're going to have dinner with your commissioning editor, and they're going to want to know what's next. So you kind of ride the coattails of your last project to have an informal, feel it out conversation, and that's free, right? Those really important conversations don't cost you anything. You're not committing yourself to ideas, but you're getting intelligence. It's really important to know how to deploy your time and money as you develop the new ones. So, you know, you're never making one film. You're making a series of films, and one creates the conditions for the success of the next. It's very important to think about awards. I mean, awards are pretty silly in our business, I think. We give ourselves so many awards, and we have these award ceremonies, and FAVA does it, and AMPIA does it, everyone does it, right? But let's face it, those awards are a way of putting a stamp of quality on your work that reassure the broadcaster when you're pitching them, right? So it's really important to enter the awards, to think about how you're going to approach the competition. We made 2 short documentaries, one called The Music of EQUUS and one called The Cinematography of EQUUS, so that we have chances at the Canadian Screen Awards. That's why we made those. Because when the jury has to do their work, they need to do a little bit of quick research on the film you've made. If they can easily discover the cinematography of EQUUS and see how hard the cinematographers worked, it gives you a chance.
Wow, that
Right?
is a lot of legwork for an award consideration.
Well, there's no way the nature of things is going to give their series to a producer who hasn't taken them to the Canadian Screen Awards.
No, it's smart. It's like next level in terms of what you're doing to sell yourself.
Well, it's all incremental. It's you know, you have a little success and a little more success and a little more success, and when you look back over it, it all looks natural. It looks like a natural progression, but it happened rung by rung. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sure. Yep.
Yep.
Niobe, so when we started this seminar or this Q&A, you said, I guess you mentioned that you were a small production company, but from individuals like us listening to you, what you just said, you actually sound quite complex, and it sounds quite huge. Do you ever feel that? Do you still feel small, or do you still understand like what you've accomplished?
We are small. We have accomplished a lot together, and all the people that I work with, I think, have grown with me together. The cinematographers, the editors, none of us could take on these projects a decade ago when we started. So we've all grown together. But I have one staff person, and everyone else I work with is a contractor who comes in at their phase of a project. And we only make really one bigger project at a time. And my new film company is called Handful of Films, because I actually want to say in the name of the company that we will only ever make a handful of films. There's only time for a handful of films. So I would say we have a reputation, but we're small and we want to remain small. I'm not the person to ask about growing a large production company. I can point you to examples of production companies that have grown large, but it's not our corporate strategy. It really just boils down to putting everything you've got into the project you're making, believing in it, wanting to make that project, loving the story, and then not stopping until you've done it, and then taking a breath and figuring out what you want to spend the next 3 years of your life doing, and then doing that, right? That's how I approach films. And I think that's an artist's approach. I think everyone who would consider them an artist probably looks at their work in the same way, whether you're a visual artist or an experimental filmmaker or a documentary filmmaker. I mean, you really only have creative and psychic room for one obsession at a time, or you're mentally ill, right?
Well,
So,
most of us are both.
yeah, I think so. A bit of mental illness is part of the
Yeah.
recipe.
What makes us crazy enough to do this?
Yeah.
Les, you had a question?
Yeah, just I'm curious about your story and scripting process. Some of your scenes, obviously, you walked in with some scripting created already.
Yep.
What's the ratio in your work versus pre-scripting scenes versus your voiceover that is written in the post-production process?
Getting the balance right between being open and being a true documentarian and having a sense of structure and what you're after is a difficult balance. And you're never going to be 100% there. And that's good. That's what you want. So I mentioned these treatments that I write. So there's probably 20 documents in my computer by the time production starts. And each one of them is an evolution on the idea. Right? So I'm talking about a sequence almost in the language of the sequence. So I'm giving words to people and talking in kind of purple prose because I want to be in that zone, even though it's just a treatment. Then before I go to a location, I'm writing, in my case, straight to cameras, whatever I'll be saying to the camera, but I'm also doing shot lists, and I'm also writing what I think a scientist would say, right? If it's an ethnographic encounter, I'll try to flesh out the narrative of that sequence. So, maybe there's an arrival. How am I going to meet the characters? So that it's not staged, so it's not contrived. It's a real meeting. What kinds of things could I show by doing with these people? Can I ride a horse there? Will they take me out on a horse? What could be some of the challenges? Where could we find the jeopardy in this setting? It's really fucking cold. So how can we convey how cold it is? How can we be uncomfortable safely? So these are all things we're thinking about. And then I'm not very good at reviewing my footage because at the end of the day, I just work on my notes, right? So I just trust that Aaron and Darren are reviewing the footage and they're going to talk to me about it. But I'm rewriting kind of the script, and I do this with a pen on paper in little books. And I'm also changing, refining, canceling, inventing new straight to cameras the whole time. And I do 30, 40 straight to cameras for everyone that makes the cut, but it's just important to be trying things out. Yeah, that's what I can say. And then the writing process happens later. That's when you go into the edit suite. Then you're actually writing the narration, if there is narration. But the more of that you can do, the better you can pivot and be open to the new and not get lost when you're out there. I'll give you an example. Fast Horse, the short film we made about Indian relay horse racing. I wasn't the director. I was helping the director, Alexander Lazarovich. But the whole film was supposed to be about this horse, this fast horse, this thoroughbred. They'd had a terrible racing season in 2017, so they decided to buy fast race horses that had been retired from Woodbine Racetrack and come back to the Calgary Stampede in 2018 and kick ass. And there was this particularly promising horse they bought in Saskatchewan, Fast Horse, right? So we thought, okay, we're going to wrap the narrative around this horse, teaching a thoroughbred to have brakes, because the particular mechanics of Indian relay mean your horse has to stop so you can jump off it. And thoroughbreds don't stop, they just run. So we thought, well, this is good. We'll follow this horse all the way to the new Calgary Stampede. The horse got injured the week before the Calgary Stampede. Suddenly, they pull the horse, and we're trying to figure out how do we explain in the narrative of this film that the horse disappears, and there's another horse. So we're obsessed with this problem. We think, okay, we're going to go back to Siksika First Nation, and we're going to film a sequence where the guys explain the injury and how they have to trade out the horse, but none of it felt right. And we're just freaking out. And then at the Calgary Stampede, the horse racer jumps off his horse in the exchange. A bit of an explanation. The jockeys race 3 laps around the track at the Calgary Stampede. They change horses every time they come back to the start and jump onto a new horse.
They leap off the moving horse
Yeah.
and full on jump in
Thank
the
you.
air and bareback onto the next horse. It's like cool. Like I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, thank you. And so Cody, our jockey, jumps off his horse at the first exchange and just gets flattened by another guy's horse. Right?
It's rough.
Yeah. And you know, in retrospect, once you get to this point, which is 2/3 of the way through the film, you don't care about the fast horse. All you're thinking about is what just happened to Cody. Hey, he's blood on his face, and he's just been trampled, and he gets back on a horse and finishes the race. That's all you're thinking about. And yet, we were so distracted with our preconceptions about the story that we didn't fully come to grips with what the story then was, which was, why did Cody get back on the horse? What happened? How do you feel about losing that badly? And so we didn't really get that stuff from him. And it makes the film a compromised film, you know. So that's an example of where you have to just go 90 degrees as a documentary director. You have to be ready for that. So you don't want to be overscripted. You don't want to get distracted by your structure, even though it has to be there. That was a long answer, but.
Okay, more questions? Wow, we exhausted you. Okay.
We should talk about the music.